Most gardeners assume vegetables always grow better in the ground. More soil, more space, more room for roots to stretch out. It sounds logical, but surprisingly some vegetables outperform garden beds the moment they are moved into a pot. Music. They grow faster, produce cleaner harvests, suffer fewer diseases, and in many cases yield more food per square foot than plants struggling in traditional garden beds. That's because containers give gardeners something the open ground often cannot: control, better drainage, cleaner soil, fewer weeds, fewer pests, and the ability to move plants exactly where they need to be. In today's video, we're counting down 15 container vegetables that outperform garden beds. These are not balcony compromises. These are measurable upgrades in yield, in cleanliness, and in harvest control. Make sure to stick around until the very end. Not only will we reveal our #1 crop, but we'll also share why that final plant is the only one on this entire list that may genuinely require a container for most gardeners watching today. It is the cleanest possible example of what container gardening can unlock when the ground simply cannot. Along the way, we'll cover the exact pot depths, the right sun hours, and the realistic days to harvest for every crop. Real numbers, real specifications gardeners can act on tomorrow morning. Let's get started. At number 15, we have kale. Most gardeners picture kale as a sprawling brassica that needs serious garden space to thrive. But experienced container gardeners know kale is one of the most pot-friendly leafy greens on the planet. Music. In traditional garden beds, kale battles flea beetles, cabbage worms, and competing weeds that constantly drain its energy. Heavy clay soil also compacts around its shallow root mass, slowing growth and reducing leaf size. Containers solve nearly all of those problems at once. A 2-gallon pot, just 8 inches deep, supports a full plant with healthy roots. Loose potting mix delivers the drainage kale craves. Elevation reduces pest pressure dramatically. Music. Busy gardeners also love that kale tolerates partial shade, which means a movable pot can chase morning sun on a balcony where in-ground plots never could. Cut and come again harvesting begins at 50 days from transplant, or just 25 days for tender baby leaves. Music. A single container near the kitchen door can supply fresh greens for months. The leaves stay clean, the slugs stay away, and the plant keeps producing as the outer leaves are removed. Sometimes the secret to growing better kale isn't a bigger garden bed. It's a small pot with better drainage and a thoughtful place in the sun. Moving down to number 14, we have Swiss chard. Most people assume chard belongs in the open garden, lined up in long rainbow rows. But surprisingly, chard becomes more productive when planted densely in containers. Music. In garden beds, university guidance spaces chard about 12 inches apart in the row. Rain also splashes mud across the brilliant stems, dulling their colors. Containers flip that math. Extension specialists recommend 4 to 6 chard plants in a single 5-gallon container, which roughly doubles the per square foot yield versus an in-ground row. Music. A pot just 10 to 12 inches deep provides everything chard needs. Drainage stays consistent. The elevated rim keeps every red, yellow, pink, and orange stem mud-free and photo-ready. Music. Busy gardeners harvest the outer leaves every few days, while the center keeps pushing new growth. Full leaves arrive in 50 to 60 days, and the cut-and-come-again habit means one pot can produce abundance for an entire season. Music. chard also tolerates afternoon shade, which lets gardeners stretch the harvest deep into summer by simply repositioning the container. Sometimes the secret to growing better Swiss chard isn't a longer row, it's a deeper, denser pot with the freedom to move. Coming in at number 13 is arugula. Most gardeners picture arugula as a quick spring green that disappears the moment the weather warms. But experienced container growers know arugula thrives far longer when grown in a movable pot. Music. In traditional garden beds, arugula bolts the instant summer heat arrives. Once the plant flowers, the leaves turn bitter and the harvest collapses within days. Slugs and flea beetles add even more pressure. Containers solve every part of that problem. A pot just 6 to 8 inches deep grows a generous patch of arugula with excellent drainage and almost zero weed competition. Music. When afternoon temperatures climb, gardeners simply slide the container into partial shade. That single move can double the harvest window compared to a fixed in-ground row baking in full sun. Music. Baby leaf harvest begins 21 to 40 days from seed. Grown as microgreens, the cotyledons are ready in just 7 to 14 days, making arugula one of the fastest gardening rewards possible. Music. A simple succession schedule of 3 small pots, seeded 2 weeks apart, delivers a steady stream of fresh peppery leaves from spring straight through fall. Sometimes the secret to growing better arugula isn't more garden space, it's a small pot with the freedom to follow the shade. Next up at number 12, we have beets. Most people assume beets must grow in deep, open garden beds to develop their famous round roots. But surprisingly, beets often grow cleaner and more uniformly inside a container. Music. In garden soil, hidden rocks, sticks, and compacted clay deflect developing beet roots, producing forked, cracked, or stunted bulbs. Weeds also compete aggressively during the slow early weeks. Containers eliminate every one of those obstacles. Penn State Extension confirms beets can be planted in a half-gallon container, spaced 2 to 3 inches apart, which means a single 12-inch round pot easily produces 8 to 10 beets. Music. Loose potting mix lets the roots expand freely. A pot 8 to 12 inches deep with 6 hours of sun delivers everything beets need to thrive. Music. Busy gardeners also love that beets are a 2-for-1 crop. The tender greens are ready to harvest as early as day 30. The roots themselves mature in 50 to 70 days. Music. Pulling beets from a container is also dramatically easier than digging them from heavy ground. The roots slide out cleanly with almost no soil cleanup required. Sometimes the secret to growing better beets isn't more garden space, it's loose rock-free potting mix and a container that does the hard work for you. At number 11, we have bok choy. Most gardeners picture bok choy as a finicky Asian green that demands a perfect cool season bed. But experienced container gardeners know it is one of the most pot-friendly brassicas available. Music. In traditional garden beds, bok choy is shredded year after year by flea beetles that emerge directly from the surrounding soil. The damage often makes the crop nearly unharvestable before it ever heads up. Containers solve that pest problem in a way nothing else can. Elevated pots make it physically harder for soil-emerging beetles to reach the leaves, which dramatically reduces feeding damage. Music. A container just 8 inches deep provides everything bok choy needs. Drainage stays consistent, soil quality is uniform, weed pressure essentially disappears. Music. Busy gardeners also love how fast bok choy delivers. Baby heads are ready in 30 to 45 days, and full heads mature in 45 to 60 days. A late summer planting can still mature comfortably before cold weather arrives. Music. Compact varieties allow several plants to share one container, which means even a tiny patio can produce an impressive succession of fresh, tender heads through spring and fall. Sometimes the secret to growing better bok choy isn't a bigger garden. It's an elevated pot that lifts the entire crop out of pest range. Coming in at number 10 are dwarf snap peas. Most people assume peas need long trellised rows and serious garden real estate. But surprisingly, dwarf snap peas are one of the most container-friendly spring crops on the planet. Music. In garden beds, peas often germinate slowly because cold spring soil takes weeks to warm up. Mud splashes onto the developing pods, and the bottom flowers rot when ground drainage fails after spring rain. Containers solve all three problems at once. A pot just 10 to 12 inches deep warms several days faster than open ground, which can push germination forward by 1 to 2 full weeks. Music. Extension guidance confirms 5 to 10 gallon pots easily accommodate peas, and dwarf bush varieties skip the trellising tax that pole types require. Music. Busy gardeners also benefit from cleaner pods. The container rim keeps developing peas elevated and mud-free. Drainage is consistent. The roots never sit in cold water. Music. Harvest begins in 55 to 70 days, and the plants tolerate part shade in cooler spring weather, giving gardeners flexibility about where to place the pot for maximum production. Sometimes the secret to growing better snap peas isn't a longer trellis. It's a warm, well-drained pot that wakes the seeds up early. Next up at number 9, we have parsley. Most gardeners think of parsley as a humble herb tucked into a corner of the garden bed. But experienced container growers know parsley is an absolute thrives in a pot performer. Music. In traditional garden beds, parsley's long taproot fights compacted clay, slowing establishment and reducing leaf production. Slugs love the tender new growth. Containers solve every one of those issues. A pot 8 to 10 inches deep gives the taproot room to descend freely through loose potting mix with excellent drainage. Music. Extension specialists recommend liquid fertilizer at half strength every 3 to 4 weeks, far easier to deliver consistently in a container than across a sprawling garden bed. Music. Busy gardeners also benefit from parsley's tolerance for partial shade. 4 to 6 hours of sun is plenty, which means a single pot produces abundance even in tricky balcony corners. Music. The real container advantage comes at season's end. While in-ground parsley dies back with the first hard freeze, a movable pot can be brought to a sunny windowsill and continue producing leaves for months. Harvest begins 40 to 50 days after transplant. Sometimes the secret to growing better parsley isn't a bigger garden. It's a deep pot that follows the seasons indoors when the ground freezes. At number 8, we have chives. Most people picture chives as a small herb tucked among the strawberries or asparagus. But surprisingly, chives become more productive and more flavorful when restricted to a container. Music. In garden beds, chives spread aggressively and compete with surrounding crops for nutrients. The clump can become overcrowded within 2 seasons, which reduces both leaf quality and flowering. Containers eliminate the spread and concentrate the harvest. A pot just 6 to 8 inches deep is plenty for a productive clump that returns reliably every spring as a true perennial. Music. Extension specialists recommend liquid fertilizer at half strength every 4 to 6 weeks for container chives. That slower, more controlled growth concentrates the essential oils, which actually intensifies the onion flavor. Music. Busy gardeners love that one well-placed container can supply a household for years. Harvest begins 30 days after transplant, and the plant returns stronger every spring without replanting. Music. Placing the pot near the kitchen door means fresh chives are always within arm's reach for eggs, baked potatoes, salads, and soups. That kind of accessibility is impossible with chives buried somewhere in a back garden bed. Sometimes the secret to growing better chives isn't more garden space. It's a small pot that contains the spread and concentrates the flavor. Coming in at number 7, we have cilantro. Most gardeners picture cilantro as a frustrating crop that bolts the moment summer arrives. But experienced container growers know cilantro thrives when given mobility. Music. In traditional garden beds, cilantro is trapped under fixed conditions. When the heat hits, the plant flowers within days, the leaves turn bitter, and the harvest abruptly ends. Containers change the entire dynamic. A pot 8 to 10 inches deep gives the taproot room to develop fully, and drainage is far easier to manage than in heavy garden soil. Music. Extension specialists describe cilantro as a great option for indoor herb gardens, and that mobility is the real game changer. When afternoon temperatures climb, gardeners simply slide the pot into partial shade and extend the harvest by weeks. Music. Busy gardeners also rotate 3 successively seeded pots 2 weeks apart, which delivers continuous fresh leaves from spring through fall. That kind of choreography is impossible in a single in-ground row. Music. Harvest begins when the plant reaches 6 inches tall, typically 40 to 60 days from seed. Allowed to bolt, the same plant produces coriander seeds in 90 days for a second harvest. Sometimes the secret to growing better cilantro isn't more garden bed. It's 3 small pots that follow the shade and stagger the harvest. Next up at number 6, we have bush summer squash and zucchini. Most people assume squash needs sprawling garden rows to produce well, but surprisingly, bush varieties produce abundance from a single sturdy pot. Music. In garden beds, summer squash battles powdery mildew constantly. Sprawling vines lie flat on wet mulch, trapping moisture against the leaves and creating perfect fungal conditions. Slugs and squash bugs add even more pressure. Containers solve nearly all of those problems through elevation and airflow. A pot at least 16 to 18 inches deep, holding 5 to 10 gallons of potting mix, supports a full bush plant with strong drainage. Music. Extension specialists confirm bush varieties of summer squash fit easily into small gardens and pots, requiring far less footprint than vining types. Music. Busy gardeners also benefit from the dramatic mildew reduction. Elevated leaves get more airflow than ground-pinned vines, and the disease pressure drops sharply across the entire growing season. Music. Harvest begins 45 to 55 days from seed. A single healthy plant in a generous container can produce abundance throughout the summer with just 8 hours of daily sun and consistent watering. Sometimes the secret to growing better zucchini isn't a wider garden row. It's a deep pot that lifts the leaves into the airflow. At number 5, we have dwarf okra. Most gardeners assume okra is strictly a southern garden crop, but experienced container growers know dwarf okra is purpose-built for a pot on a hot patio. Music. In traditional garden beds, tall okra often falls over in summer storms, and the plant struggles in northern soil that never warms enough for heavy pod production. Containers solve both problems beautifully. Extension specialists recommend one plant per 5 to 7 gallon container, with spineless dwarf varieties being far less likely to topple than standard tall okra. Music. A deep container 14 to 18 inches tall provides exactly the warm root environment okra evolved for. A black grow bag on a south-facing patio runs measurably hotter at the root zone than open garden soil. Music. Busy gardeners also benefit from the upright compact habit. Pods stay visible, harvest is fast, the plant keeps producing as long as pods are picked young and tender. Music. 8 hours of full sun and consistent watering produce harvests beginning 50 to 65 days from transplant. Even northern gardeners can finally grow real okra in a single hot, well-drained container. Sometimes the secret to growing better okra isn't a southern garden. It's a black grow bag and a sunny corner of the patio. Coming in at number 4, we have turmeric. Most people assume turmeric only grows in tropical countries, but surprisingly, gardeners across the entire continental United States grow it successfully every year in containers. Music. In garden beds, turmeric is essentially impossible outside zones 9 and warmer. The 9 to 10 month growing cycle is longer than the frost-free window in most of North America, and the rhizomes simply rot in cold, wet ground. Containers change everything. A pot at least 12 inches deep and 14 inches across, filled with loose, well-drained mix at pH 6.0 to 6.8, gives turmeric exactly the rhizome-friendly substrate it needs. Music. Extension specialists treat containers as the default approach in temperate North America, allowing the plant to spend summer outdoors and overwinter indoors, safely above freezing. Music. Busy gardeners plant 2-inch rhizome chunks 2 inches deep in spring. 4 to 6 hours of bright filtered sun with some afternoon shade produces the strongest growth. Music. Harvest arrives 240 to 300 days later, when the leaves naturally die back in fall. A single pot can yield several fresh, golden, intensely aromatic rhizomes from a footprint smaller than a dinner plate. Sometimes the secret to growing better turmeric isn't moving to Hawaii. It's a generous pot that follows the seasons indoors. Next up at number 3, we have sweet potatoes in grow bags. Most gardeners assume sweet potatoes need long southern rows of loose soil, but experienced container growers know grow bags transform this crop completely. Music. In traditional garden beds, harvesting sweet potatoes is a destructive event. Garden forks routinely damage 15 to 25% of the crop, slicing through tubers buried under heavy soil. Containers eliminate that loss entirely. Extension specialists recommend 1 to 2 slips per 5-gallon grow bag, planted 6 inches deep, because the more nodes underground, the bigger the final yield. Music. When harvest time arrives, gardeners simply tip the bag over and collect the tubers cleanly, with 0 fork damage. Music. Busy gardeners also benefit from edible foliage along the way. Young leaves and vine tips can be cooked like spinach throughout summer, giving the crop a continuous secondary harvest. Music. Bush varieties like Puerto Rico and Vardaman are perfectly suited to pots. 6 to 8 hours of sun, 12 to 14 inches of depth, and 90 to 120 days produce a generous harvest of clean, undamaged sweet potatoes. Sometimes the secret to growing better sweet potatoes isn't a southern row. It's a soft grow bag that tips over and reveals the harvest intact. At number 2, we have oyster mushrooms in buckets. Most gardeners never consider mushrooms a real crop. But surprisingly, oyster mushrooms in a 5-gallon bucket can outproduce any vegetable on this list per square foot. Music. In a garden bed, oyster mushrooms simply cannot be grown reliably. They need controlled humidity, controlled temperature, and a pasteurized substrate that no outdoor soil can ever provide. Containers are not just convenient here. The container is the entire production architecture. A food-grade 5-gallon bucket with half-inch holes drilled around the sides holds the inoculated straw or sawdust substrate. Music. Extension cultivation guides describe this bucket method as a proven home-scale production system, and peer-reviewed research confirms substrates like alfalfa pulp deliver biological efficiency above 160%. Music. Busy gardeners place the bucket indoors at 64 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit with 80% humidity. The first flush of mushrooms appears just 21 to 35 days after inoculation. Music. A single bucket then produces multiple flushes over several weeks, generating pounds of fresh mushrooms from a footprint smaller than a kitchen stool. Only purchased commercial spawn should ever be used. Foraged lookalikes can be dangerous. Sometimes the secret to growing better mushrooms isn't a garden at all. It's a clean bucket, pasteurized straw, and commercial spawn. And finally, taking the crown at number 1, we have ginger in grow bags. This is the one crop on this entire list that may genuinely require a container for most gardeners watching today. Music. In garden beds, ginger is essentially impossible across roughly 90% of the continental United States. The plant needs 8 to 10 months of warmth, loose loamy soil at pH 5.5 to 6.5, and absolute protection from freezing. Containers deliver every one of those conditions on demand. Extension specialists specify a pot at least 12 inches deep and 18 inches in diameter, or a 7-gallon grow bag filled with loamy, well-drained mix. Music. Bright shade of just 2 to 5 hours per day is ideal. Full sun actually stresses the plant. A March through May planting produces a harvest the following January through March. Music. Busy gardeners simply move the grow bag indoors before frost and continue the long growing cycle in a warm corner near a window. Penn State and University extensions in Hawaii both confirm this container approach as the standard for subtropical climates. Music. The reason ginger earns the number 1 spot is structural, not stylistic. For most viewers, the container isn't a compromise versus the garden bed. It is the only path to a ginger harvest at all. Sometimes the secret to growing better ginger isn't more garden space. It's a generous grow bag and a willingness to bring the harvest indoors. The biggest mistake gardeners make is assuming bigger garden beds automatically produce better harvests. But sometimes a small, well-managed pot creates better growing conditions than any open ground ever could. Better drainage, better airflow, better soil control, fewer weeds, fewer pests, and the freedom to move every plant exactly where it needs to be. That's why so many crops genuinely outperform garden beds when given a container. From a 2-gallon pot of kale to a 7-gallon bag of ginger, the right container in the right place can produce abundance that the open ground simply cannot match. You don't need acres of land to grow impressive amounts of food. Sometimes a few well-placed pots on a patio, balcony, or back porch can outperform an entire garden bed. Once you experience how productive container gardening can become, you'll start seeing patios, balconies, porches, and sunny corners in a completely different way. If this video helped you, hit that subscribe button and leave a like to support the channel. Every subscriber helps us bring more practical container gardening content like this to gardeners around the world. Which of these 15 crops are you planning to grow first? Let us know down in the comments. We read every single one, and your answers help shape future videos. In our next video, we'll reveal the 10 container vegetables that produce the highest yield per square foot, with exact pot sizes and harvest numbers for every single crop. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next garden.